Hello, Objectified Advocate here. Thanks for tuning in. I'm starting this new series of videos because I've perceived a bit of a gap in some of the arguments that are typically made on the internet. Namely, that the types of people that do not commonly frequent the internet might be unaware of the particular vernacular some of us use. If you were, for example, to use the term virtue signaling outside of an argument you're having on the internet, could you really be sure the person to whom you were directing the term would even be aware of what that phrase meant? Upon searching YouTube, I've found that the actual concrete definition of this term isn't really addressed. Dr. Jordan Peterson appears to talk about it a bit in one of the related videos that appears when searching for the phrase, but he doesn't really provide a definition as much as he simply describes examples of it. hbomberguy seems to have done a video addressing the term, but after watching it, I'm not entirely sure that it's all that accurate. For some reason, he also addresses additional terms in the video and seems to cast the virtue signaling term in a dismissive light, rather than a neutral one. From what I can gather, I believe he is doing this because he perceives the term being thrown at him and what appear to be ideological allies as an insult. Anyway, it's none of my concern. In this video, as objectively as possible, I'm going to attempt to nail down the definition of this term and provide concrete examples of it in action from both sides of the political aisle. So, what is virtue signaling? We'll begin with the definition, as provided from Wikipedia, and then we'll build from there. Virtue signaling is the conspicuous expression of moral values done primarily with the intent of enhancing standing within a social group. The term was first used in signaling theory to describe any behavior that could be used to signal virtue, especially piety among the religious. Since 2015, the term has become more commonly used as a pejorative characterization by commentators to criticize what they regard as platitudinous, empty, or superficial support of certain political views, and also used within groups to criticize their own members for valuing outward appearance over substantive action. This more recent usage of the term has been criticized for misusing the concept of signaling and encouraging lazy thinking. With the definition out of the way, let's go on to provide some examples, and where people might get incidents of virtue signaling mixed up with something else. Let's take, for example, a Facebook post by a random person. Facebook is often a prime location of virtue signaling because of its large public presence and the large amount of people your signal will reach. In virtue signaling, it's important to reach the largest amount of people while incurring the least amount of risk to yourself. So let's say this random person's Facebook friends are 90% Republican, 10% Democrat, and this person posts a Facebook status that says, "This Russia scandal with Trump is all just a big hoax. Democrats are just whining about someone not on their team winning. Democrats sure are stupid." Given the makeup of this person's Facebook friend group who will be able to see this post, this is likely an overwhelmingly uncontroversial opinion. It reinforces something that most of his friend group already believes. As such, considering it confirms their biases and plays to their own manner of thinking, many of his friends will probably like this post, and perhaps even comment on it, saying things like, "Yeah, that's so true," and "I was going to say the same thing." In posting this status on Facebook, this person affirms their loyalty to their in-group, in this case, Republicans, and insults the out-group, in this case, Democrats. In an in-group, virtue can be measured by loyalty to the in-group and hatred of the out-group. The more of either factor, the better. This status, posted by a random member of the in-group, was a double whammy of virtue signaling, displaying both a loyalty to the in-group and a hatred of the out-group. It is an easy way to earn points within the group, while presenting minimal risk. In fact, the friends of his that were commenting on his post publicly, saying things like, "Yeah, that's so true," and "I was going to say the same thing," are even virtue signaling in their own way. They have perceived, or maybe anticipated, the positive reaction this will invoke from the in-group, and are piggybacking on the original virtue signal to signal their own virtue. But what if it was the other way around? What if this random person had 90% Democrat friends and 10% Republican friends, but they posted the same message? This would not be virtue signaling. The reason for this is that virtue signaling is typically a minimal risk maneuver to incur favor points or elicit favorable reinforcement from the in-group. If you are intentionally presenting a very controversial opinion to a large amount of people you know will be actively hostile to that opinion, you are not virtue signaling. In all likelihood, you are probably looking to start an argument or debate. A person that is virtue signaling does not typically do so with the intention of starting an argument on that topic. But let's say you're already in an argument, a debate even, On Twitter or live in person? Is it possible to virtue signal in this format? Absolutely. In this case, it becomes a powerful debate tactic that I believe unfortunately goes largely unnoticed unless you are actively looking for it. It's quite insidious. In the case of debate virtue signaling, it isn't the in-group you are signaling your virtue to, but rather the audience. If you aren't sure what I'm talking about yet, it will become very recognizable when I begin rattling off examples. So let's say you're in a debate, and you want to make a pathos, an emotional moral argument. You need to cast your opponent in a very negative light, make them look like the devil, while you look virtuous. What's an easy way to do this? Take an overwhelmingly uncontroversial opinion and claim to be an advocate for it. For example, someone might, at the beginning of a debate, claim to be anti-rape. Now, I'm fairly confident that 99.99% of the human race is anti-rape, so that position is not going to be challenged by anyone with half a brain. In fact, because it is such a universally accepted good position, this statement signals the virtue of the person that expressed it. But consider the implication now buried in the subconscious minds of the audience. One side of this debate is anti-rape. They have come out and specifically said so. Even if the other side of the debate says absolutely nothing about rape at all, because they are the opponent of the anti-rape side, it is de facto implied that they are pro-rape. If the other side doesn't catch this in time and specifically come out and agree that they are also anti-rape, it casts them in an unfavorable light, even if they haven't realized it. This, of course, is not limited to simple pro and anti positions. I have seen similar techniques using such phrases as, "We assert the basic humanity of blah blah blah," because this is a statement that practically no one would disagree with, and it implies that their opponent is against this kind of thing simply for opposing them. In all likelihood, their opponent probably agrees with the basic humanity of whoever it is being discussed, but is in opposition for different reasons. Because the virtue signaling side is not stating these other reasons, however, merely the incredibly uncontroversial ones, they can easily make their opponent out to be a monster by implying that they are in opposition to all of their positions rather than a select number for specific reasons. But there are more methods that you can use to virtue signal. It can also show that you support a certain idea that your group agrees with, or are willing to help a cause that most people consider to be a just one, without actually getting up and doing anything. One example of this type of virtue signaling is the practice of overlaying a flag over one's profile picture in solidarity with a country that has recently experienced a terror attack. Now, the left and right side of the political divide both have their opinions on this particular practice, and I won't weigh in on them myself, but I will say this. The action of overlaying the flag over your picture is absurdly easy, and at no risk to yourself. You are simply displaying your heartfelt sorrow at the terrible events that transpired or whatever, possibly with a long Facebook/Twitter post to boot. I think it's largely vacuous and hollow. If you are truly upset, if you truly wish to help, donate to a charity concerning the victims of the attack. I think regardless of our political opinions regarding the attack itself, we can all agree the victims need help, right? So work together and help them get their lives back together if you truly care. If you post about your generous donations to the charity afterward, it'll still be virtue signaling, but at the very least you will have earned it. Now, we've discussed online virtue signaling and virtue signaling in public forum or debate, but what about virtue signaling in everyday life, in the real world? Can you virtue signal without even being present or saying a word? You certainly can. Consider these signs. I'm not sure if they're present in other countries, but I'm sure if you're American, you've seen them around. Now, in an area that is largely discriminatory or stereotypical toward people that speak the languages here other than English, this sign is actually a controversial statement and not a case of virtue signaling. But be honest, those of you that have seen these signs, do you typically see them in Republican districts? In my experience, these signs are in practically every yard of upper middle class Democrat homes, where the sentiment they express is not only tolerated, it is celebrated. This sign serves to signal to other left-wing homes that the owners of this house, too, are left-wing, that they are also part of the in-group, and that, virtuously, they are advocates of the sentiments expressed upon the sign. But bear in mind, virtue signaling is not always something that is done consciously. If done on purpose, I would agree that it's an action worthy of derision, but more often than not, it is simply an instinctual maneuver to curry favor with the rest of the in-group. The people that are virtue signaling on a subconscious level are not malicious. In fact, far from it. Often, these unknowing virtue signalers are doing it because they consider themselves to be righteous and are attempting to do something that they believe is right. With the sign, they might believe that they are reassuring foreigners in their area that the people in this house support them, even if they are in an area with practically no immigrants whatsoever. With the Facebook overlays, they probably believe that so many people expressing solidarity is helping France in some way, but moral support doesn't pay medical bills. The intent is noble. It's the practice that I would personally take issue with. It strikes me as superficial, and I think it does more harm than good, and convincing people that merely by expressing solidarity they have already helped the situation enough to put it out of their minds. But that's my opinion. Make of virtue signaling what you will. So, I hope I've provided a good foundation for understanding the concept of virtue signaling, and that after watching this video you are better equipped to spot incidents of virtue signaling in your everyday life. Rarely is it the case that interactions between human beings are starkly black and white. Often, we can all find some things that we agree on. We're not 100% ideologically different. Virtue signaling plays to the part of your brain that wants to classify people as either ones or zeros. Don't fall for it. Opinions are almost always more complex. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.